I am a very strong union person. I believe in organized labor. I believe it is the only mechanism to put a brake of some sort on predatory capitalism. It's the only mechanism to stop enslavement. Union workers, people banding together to saying this is what we'll accept as we give our lives to working in the mines or working in a factory or working in IT or working for a banking company, whatever it is, it makes no difference. When you consider how much time is spent in a capitalist society to just get enough money to pay the rent or buy food or meet the utilities or make a car payment or send a kid to college, there has got to be some balancing mechanism to say, okay, I'm working for your company's making a profit, this is what I want as my share. In capitalism, that's the worst thing you can say to a capitalist is, your workers have got to be paid a decent wage. No. That's why slavery in this country, in most countries, but especially in this country, people were willing to die. We had to kill 700,000 Americans just to eliminate the fucking terrible institution of slavery. But to the people who had enslaved people under their thumb, it was great. There were no wages. There was no health care. There was no paid vacations. There's nothing. Just work, bastard, until you die. Okay, I guess I made my point. I am very pro-union, very pro-organized labor. So here's the issue. Railroad workers across the country are scheduled or threatening to go on strike on December 9th. This is the 29th of November, 10 days we're talking. If that happens, it would be a crippling blow to the American economy. And according to the Association of American Railroads, a nationwide rail shutdown could cost more than $2 billion per day in lost everything. Well, it's much worse than that. Now, this information comes from Popular Information, the website I've talked about many times. Judd Legum is the chief writer there, and this is what he had up today. A few stats. There are 140,000 miles of rail in the United States, and that's operated by about 115,000 rail workers. And this network, this transportation network, serves nearly every agricultural, industrial, wholesale, retail, and resource-based sector of our economy. Everything. Passenger rail service also would stop if this strike occurs, which would disrupt literally hundreds of thousands of commuters, if not millions. Now, what is the sticking point in this issue? Biden thought he had an agreement, which he didn't. There's been an attempt over the past couple of years to work this out. The rail lines and the unionized workers have been in negotiations for about 2 years. What's the sticking point? One issue: paid sick leave. What? Yes. This is not about wages. Back in July, Biden named something he called the Presidential Emergency Board in an effort to help resolve this dispute and avoid this now looming strike. And that board, the PEB, issued recommendations that form the basis of a tentative agreement back in September between the railroad companies and 12 unions. But the deal did not include any paid sick leave. This is one of the horrors of capitalism. You're sick, fuck you. You don't get any money. but I have a family. I have this. Fuck you. You don't get any money. If we can't extract your labor when we want it, you don't get any money. Anyway, the tentative agreement decided on back in September when Biden made his announcement. It was an agreement subject to ratification by the members of all these disparate rail unions. There are a bunch of them. I think there are 10 or 12. And a majority of workers at 4 of these rail unions rejected the deal. And the unions that voted against the deal represent about 60,000 rail workers, including the largest rail union, which is I don't know what the acronym is, but it's SMART, Transportation Division. And the 12 unions have agreed to honor each other's picket lines. And that sets up the possibility of a strike beginning on December 9th, when the so-called cooling off period expires. Cooling off period among the negotiators, between the negotiators, it expires. Now, the tentative agreement that Biden either thought he had or wanted the American public to think he had, that tentative agreement did get significant pay increases for rail workers. It raised wages over a 5-year period by about 25%. And that sounds, it did to me anyway, like an awful lot of money. 25%? Whoa! But the unions noted that the increase doesn't even keep up with the current pace of inflation. Now, who's to know what it's going to be 3, 4, 5 years from now? But the current pace of inflation, a 25% wage increase is not going to keep up with inflation. But even given that, the wages don't appear to be the primary sticking point among the union members. And according to Judd, railroad companies have absolutely refused to include any short-term paid leave. That means that people who work for the rail companies have got to report to work even when they're sick or forfeit their pay. I mean, think about that for just a second. You know, you're running a fever, you're throwing up, you have diarrhea, you have whatever, you have all these symptoms that indicate your body is fighting an infection of some sort, and the railroad companies say, fuck you, if you're not here, you don't get paid. Peter Kennedy, who's chief negotiator for the Maintenance Workers Union, one of those unions that rejected the deal, said, quote, it's an insane and cruel system, and these guys are fed up with it, end quote. And rail workers interviewed for this article say that some colleagues come to work with COVID because they can't afford to take time off. And the maintenance workers are seeking a deal with at least some paid sick days included. How many? 100? 50? 25? You know what the maintenance workers are looking for? A deal with at least 4 paid sick days per year. 4. And the railroad companies, according to the union, according to the maintenance workers union, the railroad companies are saying more or less, fuck you, we're not going to negotiate that. 4 days of sick leave. Now, the rail companies, you know, I mean, being the capitalist pigs that they are, they could say, okay, we'll give you the 4 days, but we want you to bring a note from your doctor. Which would be a bit humiliating to grown men and women to have to turn into their supervisor or the boss man a note from the teacher, in this case being a doctor, saying, yeah, this person had 102-degree fever, this person had this person had that. Yes, absolutely sick, and that justifies their taking 2, 3, 4 days off. But the unions won't do that. They won't even come up with that. They say, no, fuck you. I'm sorry, not the unions, the companies, the rail companies. They're saying to the unions, we won't do that. No, we're not even going to talk about it. So consider that the rail workers have jobs that are very demanding, very, well, in a lot of cases, very dangerous, too. And the jobs that some of these workers have often require them to be on the road for weeks at a time. And according to popular information here, over the last 6 years, major railroads have reduced their workforces by nearly 1/3, which increases the workloads for workers that remain. But this is what capitalism does. There's never enough profit for these fuckers. Never, never enough, until they can get to the point of having slavery reinstituted. Then maybe the profit would be enough, because they wouldn't have to pay their workers. This whole issue just makes me crazy. Almost on the same level as the Christian crazy people make me crazy. But I mean, 4 days, 4 fucking days. You know, I had COVID last July 4th. And I didn't test negative for 3 weeks. And I felt like hammered shit. And I don't work on the railroad. And the railroad companies are saying, sorry. Now, I worked through my COVID. Yeah, oh, big fucking deal. I do a podcast. You know, an hour and a half of research, an hour on the air, and I'm out of here. I go back to bed, right? But these are rail workers. And yesterday, Monday, a coalition of business groups that were organized by the worst capitalist pig fuckers in America, that's the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Horrors, they organized a coalition of hundreds of business groups, and a letter was written to congressional leaders that demanded legislation be passed prohibiting rail workers from striking. What? Telling people who work on the railroad, you don't show up, you don't have a job. We don't give a fuck if you've got cancer or leprosy, if your goddamn arm is falling off. We don't care. Be here or lose your job. How about that? How about that? So, if you are like me, in the sense that you are very much pro-union, you see organized labor as the only goddamn bulwark against predatory capitalism that is taken to unbelievable levels, what are you going to do now? What am I going to do? What are we supposed to think now? We know, or we should know, what's going to happen if the rails in this country, the railroad workers go on strike. It's going to put this country in a situation that might take God knows how many years to get out of. And it will give the Christian demons a perfect excuse for continuing to pump out their poisonous lies and bullshit about Democrats and Biden and liberals and so on and so forth. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.